Evidence disappeared, witnesses contradict themselves, and lies were sold as truths. In Lone's case, a boy of only 5 years old vanished without a trace, and the few clues that remained seemed to be part of a dark pact. Who is trying to hide the truth, and why? If you believe that every mystery deserves answers and that stories like this need to be exposed, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell. Together, we will analyze every detail to get closer to the truth that many want to hide. From the beginning, something seemed out of place. Lone's disappearance didn't fit the logic of a simple accident or a lost child. And the more time passed, the more questions arose. Remember the witnesses? Those who should have essential information about the last moments Lone was seen? Well, these same people entered a maze of contradictions. The aunt who said she saw Lone for the last time, Laudelina Peña, presented a story that seemed to be the key to everything. She claimed that Lone had been run over by a couple present at lunch, and to cover up the accident, they placed him in a pickup truck and disappeared with the body. This version sounded narrative to start collapsing. First, Laudelina's own daughters denied the story, claiming they were in the same place and didn't see anything their mother described. Then Laudelina herself admitted that she had been paid to invent this story. 50,000 pesos, a car, and a house. These were the promises made to her to support the lie. And so, what seemed to be the solution turned out to be another layer of deception. But why would someone pay to create a false version? What was this distraction really hiding? This is where Lone's case starts to become even more disturbing. In the first days after the disappearance, Lone's belongings appeared in strange places. One of his shoes was found in a shallow pond. The other, even more inexplicably, was on top of a refrigerator in an abandoned house. How is it possible that a missing child's belongings end up in such different and seemingly unrelated locations? And more, investigators began to suspect that these clues were planted, not to help, but to confuse. And then an essential question arises. Who would have an interest in creating so much confusion? Was it to buy time, to divert attention, or to protect someone? Because while these false clues circulated, the investigations were stuck in a cycle of doubts and inconsistencies. Another detail we cannot ignore is the behavior of some adults present on the day of the disappearance. Key witnesses reported that while Lone was playing with his cousins, he decided to go home alone. But instead of heading towards his grandmother's house, he ran in the opposite direction. And no one stopped him? Didn't any adult find it strange? These same people took hours to notify the police about the disappearance. And what's even stranger, while some family members seemed to act with indifference, Lone's father was the only one truly desperate, searching for his son on his own. And here's a detail that few know. In the days following the disappearance, two of Lone's relatives, people who should have been helping in the search, disappeared for hours without explanation. When they returned, they did not provide details of where they had been. Could these absences have something to do with the planted clues? Or worse, with Lone's fate? There's another element that catches attention: the police's performance. In the early days, instead of treating the case as a possible kidnapping or crime, the local police worked under the hypothesis that Lone had gotten lost in the countryside. This assumption delayed fundamental protocols such as closing borders or mobilizing more prepared teams. And when they decided to act, it was already too late. Many believe that this delay was crucial for important clues to be erased and perhaps for the real culprits to have time to disappear. Now here's the most worrying point. The local authorities, who should be leading the investigations, are also under suspicion. One of the police officers responsible for the search was accused of planting evidence to divert the investigation. Imagine this. Instead of seeking the truth, a member of the police force may have worked to cover it up. And what about the couple mentioned in Laudelina's story? Suspicions about them haven't completely disappeared. After all, the sniffer dogs detected Lone's presence in the backseat of their pickup truck. They claimed that Lone was never there, but how else do you explain the smell? To make matters worse, this same couple made several unexpected trips to another province shortly after the disappearance, without giving consistent explanations. What were they doing? And why do these trips coincide with Lone's disappearance? Finally, one question cannot be ignored. If so many people seem to be linked to false clues, contradictions, and silences, are we facing a pact? An agreement among those who should protect Lone, but for some reason decided to cover up what really happened? And there are still more questions that need answers. For example, if Laudelina's version was bought, who is really in control of this cover-up? And what is the ultimate goal of these lies? To protect someone influential? Or to prevent a larger network from being exposed? With each new twist, Lone's case becomes darker. But are we finally close to breaking this pact of silence? Or are there still buried secrets that no one has had the courage to reveal? Shortly after Lone's disappearance, theories began to emerge quickly, each trying to explain what might have happened to the boy. However, instead of bringing clarity, these hypotheses often seem to throw a smokescreen over the truth. And the most unsettling part? Some of these versions carried glaring inconsistencies, while others had indications that seemed to lead to something much bigger and darker. One of the first theories was that Lone had gotten lost. A small child, playing near a vast and unknown area, could easily wander away. But as days passed and intense searches were conducted, with drones, sniffer dogs, and even divers, no concrete trace of Lone was found. No footprints, no torn clothes, nothing. This absence of signs left the police and family in doubt. Did he really get lost? Or was this just a way to buy time while something else was happening? Another hypothesis raised was that of an accident. This version gained strength with the confession of Laudalina Peña, Lone's aunt, who stated that he had been run over by a couple present at lunch. However, as mentioned earlier, this story was quickly dismantled when it became clear that Laudalina had been paid to create a false narrative. Even so, this possibility raised suspicions. Why would someone be so desperate to cover up an accident to the point of paying for a lie? And more, could there be something much more serious behind it? And then came the most alarming theory of all, the possibility that Lone had been a victim of a human trafficking network. This rumor began to circulate when sniffer dogs identified Lone's scent in the backseat of a pickup truck belonging to the couple Laudalina accused. They categorically denied that the boy had entered the vehicle, but dogs don't lie. Additionally, records show that the couple made several quick trips to another province shortly after the disappearance. Had they taken Lone away from the area, or were they involved in something even more organized? As these theories gained strength, the local police began to face severe criticism. Many people accused the authorities of negligence or, worse, of direct involvement in covering up the case. And there are reasons to believe so. For example, the strange planted evidence, Lone's shoes found in absurdly disconnected locations, raised suspicion that someone was trying to manipulate the investigation. And who would have access to these items? Who could plant such carefully positioned clues? Fingers began to point inward to the very team that should be leading the searches. Moreover, a point that cannot be ignored is the time lost in the first 48 hours after the disappearance. The police did not close borders, did not issue national alerts, and took days to treat the case as a possible crime. This slowness allowed clues to disappear and possibly for Lone to be taken away. But we cannot ignore another line of investigation that sparked intense discussions, that Lone might have been a victim of a ritual. This theory, which seemed absurd to many, arose due to a previous case in the same region, where a child was murdered in a satanic event. The connection to Lone seemed remote, but the fact that the region has a history of pagan beliefs and extreme practices did not help reduce suspicions. However, to date, no concrete evidence supports this idea. And here is the most disconcerting point. With so many theories and suspicions, the truth seems increasingly buried in a sea of lies and misinformation. It's not just about what happened to Lone, but about how so many people can be involved in maintaining silence. Whether out of fear, guilt, or something darker, the pieces of this puzzle seem deliberately not to fit. Now think with me, which of these versions sounds more plausible? Is it really possible that Lone simply got lost without leaving any trace? Or is there something bigger, more organized, that was carefully planned to ensure that no one discovers what really happened? If so, who is in command of this game? And more importantly, how far are they willing to go to protect this secret? With so many inconsistencies, one thing is clear. Lone's case is far from being resolved, but the shadows surrounding this story may be closer to being illuminated than ever. Now that we know the search for Lone was marked by contradictions and mysterious clues, let's delve into one of the most intriguing moments of this case. And you know that detail that seems small but can change the entire narrative? This is where everything starts to connect. On June 13th, after the first failed search, one of Lone's closest relatives did something strange. He provided the police with information about what had happened in the hours following the disappearance. But what was said there became the basis for one of the case's greatest contradictions. Lone ran towards his father's house. That was the version told. Simple, direct, but at the same time full of holes. Because while one group of relatives stated this, a second group insisted that he never even got close to the house. How can this make sense? There's no way to reconcile the two versions. And here's the most disturbing part. Both versions came from people who were there at the time. Now think with me. How would you explain this contradiction? Is something much bigger being covered up? Shortly after the searches began, a discovery changed the course of the investigation. A small shoe supposedly used by Lone was found inside an abandoned house. The object was completely out of the path he was supposed to have taken. The obvious question is, how did the shoe get there? More than that, the evidence indicated that the house showed no signs of recent entry, no footprints, no broken doors, nothing. Now let me ask you directly, do you think a 5-year-old boy would have the ability to, alone, leave a clue so carefully positioned? Or did someone want it to be found there, exactly in that place? A few days later, another clue appeared, this time even more controversial. Lone's second shoe was found, but in a completely different location, inside a refrigerator, in an abandoned house near the area. Yes, you heard right, a refrigerator. It's almost as if someone wanted to create a theater, an impossible riddle to solve. And you know what's worse? Tests conducted on the shoes showed that neither had traces of mud, something that would be inevitable in a rural environment, especially considering the terrain where Lone supposedly disappeared. This raises the question, did those shoes really belong to him? Or were they placed there by someone trying to manipulate the course of the investigations? And if the clues were being planted, who could have access to them? Here the case takes an even more bizarre turn. Among those directly involved in the searches was a police officer who, shortly after, was accused of manipulating evidence. Witnesses stated that he had placed objects at the location to divert attention. In fact, he was one of those who reported finding the first shoe. Now think a police officer who should be seeking the truth becomes a suspect of manipulating evidence. Doesn't this completely change the tone of the investigation? All of this leads us to a critical point. If the evidence was being manipulated, what would be the objective? And more importantly, why do so many people around Lone seem to be involved in contradictory narratives? Here we need to talk about the silence pact we mentioned earlier. Among the 7 adults present at the fateful lunch, none provided clear or definitive answers. Instead, most statements seemed synchronized, as if they had all agreed exactly what to say. This raises another question. Is the silence of these people a sign of guilt? Or are they also being pressured by something or someone even bigger? Before we proceed, I need you to reflect with me. How many times have we seen cases where the truth seems so close, yet so distant at the same time? And worse, what happens when those who should be protecting the truth are, in reality, creating a theater to cover it up? Now let's enter the darkest part of this case, because if you think you've seen enough, wait until you hear about what was discovered in some suspects' vehicles and how this connects Lone to something even bigger than we imagine. If you're here so far, it's because you feel there's still something to be revealed, right? Then don't leave, because the next part will tie all this together on a level that few people have dared to discuss to this day. If the shoes have already raised suspicions, what came next was even harder to swallow, because amidst so many contradictions and seemingly planted clues, something caught attention. The cars of some of the men involved began to gain prominence in the investigation. One of the vehicles in question, belonging to the couple Carlos Perez and Maria Victoria Kailava, was inspected after sniffer dogs identified a specific odor in the back seat. What was found there completely changed the course of the investigation. Lone's DNA traces were detected, confirming that he had been in the car. But here's the detail no one expected. Carlos and Maria categorically denied that the boy had entered the vehicle that day. If he was never in the car, why were there such clear proofs that he was? That was the question investigators were asking. And meanwhile, Carlos and Maria provided explanations that only made everything more confusing. First, they said that the marks could be old, from some moment before the disappearance. But Lone didn't have frequent contact with them, so how would that be possible? And it didn't stop there. Another critical point involving the couple was the trips they made shortly after the disappearance. In less than a week, Carlos and Maria were seen leaving and returning from the city of Resistencia in the province of Chaco several times. Initially, they said they were negotiating the purchase of a motorhome, but that explanation quickly fell apart. The reason? During interrogations, it became clear that there were no transactions in progress. What really happened during these trips? Why so many journeys in such a short time? And you know what's more disturbing? These trips coincide with a period when other clues began to emerge, as if someone was trying to cover something up or even relocate evidence to distant places. Was Lone taken to another region, or was the objective simply to confuse the authorities? Now think about all this as we return to the adults who were present at lunch. Among the 7 initially detained, none spoke openly about what happened. But court documents reveal something that gives a new tone to the investigation. There are strong suspicions that they made a silence pact. What does this mean? Basically, they would have agreed on their versions before giving testimony. The theory gains strength because, even with seemingly similar reports, small details don't match. A clear example of this is in Laudalina Peña's statements, Lone's aunt, who at one point claimed to have seen the boy being run over and taken away. Hours later, her own daughters denied the version, saying that Laudalina couldn't have witnessed what she alleged. And the most curious part, Laudalina later admitted that she was paid to create that narrative. Who paid? According to her, a lawyer and even a local politician were involved. This not only reinforces the idea of a pact, but also suggests that influential people are working to divert attention from what really happened. Amidst all these twists, an even more terrifying hypothesis emerges: the possible connection to a human trafficking network. During the investigation, sniffer dogs marked Lone's presence in strategic locations, such as the backs of vehicles and points near the borders. And here's the point: if someone was trying to move Lone out of the country, why did the authorities take so long to react? Investigators discovered that the official alert about the disappearance was issued days later, when the most crucial time window had already passed. Borders were not monitored in time, and important locations were not immediately isolated. This allowed space for something much bigger to be happening. Now, an interesting detail: in similar cases in the region, false clues are often used to divert attention from larger operations. Does this explain the shoes found in improbable locations? And more importantly, could the delay in initial actions have been intentional, created to favor something even more obscure? As all these theories unfold, one thing becomes clear: Lone's case is not just about a missing boy. It involves a network of lies, manipulations, and possibly crimes that go far beyond a family or a small group of people. But here's the point where everything converges. To this day, none of the directly involved people have completely broken their silence. This may mean that the pact is even deeper than it seems. And if this pact is broken, the consequences could be devastating. With everything we've seen so far, it's impossible to ignore what seems obvious. There's much more behind Lone's disappearance than the versions presented. The confusing clues,